approach takes it one step further by pointing out that an urgent decentralization of humans is necessary from the pivotal role of the initiator of protection to nature. This paves the necessity of a post-human ecofeminist approach that places importance to the constructive um coexistence of humans, non-humans, and ecology, which would create a consciousness about the physical, actual nature of this planet. As Opperman argues, posthumanism has been a site where various theoretical threads of new materialisms, among them material feminism, eco-materialism, agential materialism, prismatic ecology, and material eco-criticism converge to produce new epistemological configurations. Now, using posthumanism as a theoretical framework, it then becomes necessary to pave new ways of thinking about what being human, other than human, non-human, and post-human mean. Ecology has been connected with feminism for a long time. In India, the Chipko movement, which resulted in women hugging trees and preventing them from being chopped off, was an early incident that could be cited. Women have been historically responsible for taking care of the vulnerable, and as a result, women have been safeguarding nature and other non-human beings for quite some time. According to Puello, ecofeminism is an attempt to outline a new utopian horizon addressing the environmental issue from the categories of patriarchy, androcentrism, care, sexism, and gender. So, ecofeminism aims at a practice of care that is necessary to achieve a culture of sustainability. An emphatic approach to humans and non-humans is the crux of ecofeminism, which can be established by forming a close kinship with all living and non-living forms in the face of ecological crisis. Susan Beer's Bird Box, starring Sandra Bullock, is an American post-apocalyptic horror thriller streamed on Netflix in December 2018, and within 28 days, it became the most watched film on Netflix. So, although the film received mixed critical reviews, the film is significant with its addition to the ongoing post-human ecofeminist discourse by way of emphasizing community connectedness and collective healing, which are the two main keywords that my presentation is going to deal with. With scholars preferring the term ecology over nature, including Bruno Latour and Timothy Morton, who thinks that nature refers to an authoritarian masculine existence, the term ecology has gained traction as it symbolizes artistic and scientific methods and viewpoints. Ecology also aims at the interconnections of all living and non living things, which posthumanism also promotes. This interconnectedness, or the mesh, as Morton puts it in his book, The Ecological Thought, decenters nature and focuses on the beings that surround it. This line of thought is in tandem with posthumanism, which also focuses on the decentering of one entity and instead a collaboration and entanglement of all living and non living forms. This presentation argues for a post-human ecological approach, which refers to the affinity between humans, non-humans, other than humans, and their environment in a post-anthropocentric way that thinks about nature as an ecology without a subject. Post-human ecology aims at coexisting with the ecology in order to prevent humans from objectifying, exploiting, and polluting nature. Articulates argues that posthumanism surely tries to tone down the presence of the human in order to call attention to everything that is not human. Yet, it remains firm in its belief in the possibility of a globalized ecological symbiosis of humans and non humans, in our case, humanity and environment. Post-human ecology then aims at liberty, solidarity, and equality of all living and non-living forms and upholds their relations with the new millennium challenges. It ushers in a post-humanist praxis that questions the humans and critiques the way nature is understood without obliterating it, but instead positioning itself in an informed collective dialogue. It combines the interests of the humans with the well-being of an enlarged community based on environmental interconnections. The interconnectedness with all humans and non-humans points at the vastness of the universe and to the multiplicity of beings where there is an endless stream of strangers. We witness one of these strangers in this film Bird Box, where otherworldly creatures come to Earth whose sight induces a kind of psychotic hallucination in humans that reminds them of their worst memories and forces them to commit suicide. These creatures can be termed as a part of the strange strangers that Morton refers to. These creatures surpass the human presence, the nature, the organisms, and even non-humans. Morton's theories perfectly align with the film Bird Box, where we can see his words coming to fruition. If an earthworm can be Buddha, then not all people are human. Personhood is a strange strangeness. With the creatures in the film taking over the minds of the humans, they become strangers to themselves and cannot cope with the dark thoughts in their minds. Post-human ecology focuses on the idea that we should love and care for the natural world because it is rightfully an extension of ourselves. There is a collective becoming with which there is a supposed integration of discrete persons into larger networks of being. Bird Box represents the putatively individual self's incorporation into dynamically interdependent environments. Tom, played by Trevante Rhodes, and Mallory, played by Sandra Bullock, their resilience in ensuring that they bring up the two children in the ecological surroundings, protected from the creatures, shows an emergent non-hierarchical stance that gives ontological purity and stability to a contingent for prosthetic survival. With its psychic inducing capabilities, the creatures adapt everyone who sees it with their bare eyes and make them kill themselves. The humans realize that they are in the hands of these creatures, they are devoid of any sadistic instrumentality, and there is an openness to non identity. These creatures are the distorted and twisted projections of the world that are pulled up to the front to reveal the horrific ugliness of the alienated social cruelty. Throughout the course of the film, we find so many humans who identify with the creatures and are constantly and ruthlessly working against the humans. As we see in Mallory and her children, ecological awareness would just happen to them immersively and convincingly. The consumerist ideological choice that Mallory had at the beginning of the film when she turned off the news of the catastrophe on the television showed that she still had a choice. But when she is in the middle of the apocalypse, it is a critical choice that she has to make whether she will make the journey across the river to reach the safe place. This critical choice shuts down the possibility of having to choose again. Everything else becomes inoperative when Mallory realizes that nature is out there beyond her and she has to be strictly responsible for the choices she has made. This is the precise moment when she grows up with an interconnectedness in the post-human world. I have tried to study Bird Box using an interdisciplinary framework for post-human feminism. In the contemporary moment, feminist studies is diversely situated and explores the various tenets of the historical exceptionalism given to man and the resulting hierarchies in social and cultural spheres. Even though feminist study is flourishing in other disciplines such as literature, philosophy, and art, integrating it with post-humanism challenges, expands, and enriches the discipline and broadens it as the category of analysis and system of representation. Posthumanism offers profound insights and perspectives to feminist studies by entangling it with ethics of care, bodily differences, prosthetics, aesthetics, and performativity. A posthuman feminist approach fosters complex understanding of the cultural history of the posthuman body. In posthuman feminism, Rosie Braidotti writes that posthuman feminism walks through the intersectional critical lenses of gender, race, class, sexual orientation, ability, age, among others, acknowledging the differences in power and status among humans and between humans and non-human species. Post-human feminist research is an event that is emergent, coming differently into being in each context and with each unique sets of bodies, materiality, spaces, and subjectivities. A post-human feminist genealogy aims to maintain a comprehensive and inclusive way of recognizing the contributions of women who have shaped post-human aesthetics with their radical imagination. It also highlights the post-human shift by generating original perspectives of women on areas of representation commonly associated with male imagination, such as science and technology. A post-human feminist framework allows us to draw on many different sources and histories in an inclusive way that opens to other species and non-human forms and other than human forms. Bird Box constantly evokes humanity's failure to leave a habitable world for the next generation. The film epitomizes a problematic human non human enmeshment and poignantly demonstrates the dire consequences of the social, cultural, and natural interpenetrating each other. The film mirrors a post human environmentalism where the incalculability of human fails to consider environmental changes. It centers on a sudden in media re reversal from civilization to the primitive. The film's premise revolves around the unexplained mass suicides in East Europe, which then spreads to other parts of the world. Bird Box reminds us that humans would have to pay for their ignorance of the non human, of the ecology, and the larger than life universe. This ignorance leads to the collective misery that humans suffer in the film because of their obliviousness to their own affairs and how it affects the ecosystem. The creatures that invade the countries are psychosis causing paranormal entities, and the only way to be saved from them is by staying inside or wearing blindfolds so that no one can look at them. Tightly sealed, boxed in houses, black painted glasses, and making sure that the covered all around. Some of the ways the characters at moment, the orange melon, that the stores are packed as people are stocking up food because of the serious nature of an impending disaster. Airport and train stations are shut down as there has been an increasing number of unexplained mass suicides spreading all across Europe, Siberia, and Russia. People are exhibiting psychotic behavior as soon as they come across these strange creatures. Mallory shuts off the TV and focuses back on the painting that she has been doing. Seeing the painting, her sister comments that the people in it are lonely, to which Mallory replies the loneliness is just incidental. It's really about people's inability to connect. She said she loves staying in her studio and does not want to go out to the world and meet people, and she finds it unnecessary. From there to the ending of the film, where she voluntarily walks into the school with her children in order to belong to a community, marks her journey from a self interested individual to a woman who wants to belong to a community with hope and kindness. Mallory, Tom, and the other characters express differing attitudes towards the apocalypse. They represent a multitude of contrasting voices, and the way they navigate their way through the apocalypse once their survival instincts kick in represents who these people truly are. Along with Mallory, there is Tom, as you can see in the slide. He is an ex-military man who is now working as a secondary school teacher. He does not have the self-centered stoicism of Mallory. Instead, he plays the role of a self-sacrificing protector and gives up his life in order to protect Mallory and the children. His service in the military prevents him from being an imperialist exploiter, and he is always ready to help. He instills in the children the imagery of trees, flowers, birds, and clouds in the open sky and promises them that they will all see all these very soon and play with other children. Mallory interrupts Tom's story and puts the children to bed and tells Tom that now they think they're going to go outside and climb trees with all these new kids and see butterflies and flowers. It's not a story, it's a lie. Because they'll never climb trees. They're never going to make new friends. Why would you make them believe something like that? Humanity perforce undergoes sensory crippling under the threat of unknown creatures. They not only affect the existence, daily lives, and health of humans, but also the economy and politics. The unexplained and unspecified origin of the menace marks the limits and ultimate failure of humanity in subduing nature through an incessant search for knowledge. People learn to survive in the strange environment by considering how cultural and material forces are integrated with this viral condition, where the non-human is as much enmeshed as the human. When the significance and the extent of the effects of human practices over the non-human agencies and the resulting complexities of the post-humans are understood, only then workable solutions follow, as it does in the film. Bird Box starts with a character called Rick's declaration that we have a place, a compound, we have a community. It's safe here. When told at the very outset that Mallory won't be able to make it to the compound by the river if she travels with the children, not for a moment does Mallory flinch. And she makes up her mind that she and the two children will travel together to the safe house. She makes it very clear to the children that they have to be alert, quiet throughout the journey, and not take off their blindfolds no matter what happens. Because if they don't listen to her instructions, none of them is going to make it. She declares, you must listen as closely as you can. If you hear something in the woods, you tell me. If you hear something in the water, you tell me. But you never ever take off your blindfold. If you look, you will die. While on their sojourns, they discover rapidly downsized society is on the edge of extinction. As Morton argues, ecology, if it means anything at all, means being without nature. When we drag it front and center against our ideological interest, it stops being a world in which we can immerse ourselves. With the help of this ecology, Mallory manages to save her children and herself at last. With finding the new way of living, Mallory and her children at the end of the film embark on a new path to live sustainably and cohabitate with the non-humans and the post-humans. That way, Bird Box allows more room for allegorical interpretation, especially if it is considered as a grotesque foretelling of the violent end of the Anthropocene. The tragedy of Oedipus can be recalled here, who gouged out his eye for his mistakes. Here in the film, where all the surviving humans wear a blindfold as the only way of surviving, they are also repenting for the mistakes committed by the whole of humanity on the ecology. In both Sophocles' story of Oedipus and in Bird Box, we can witness how personal space is isolated from the surrounding environment to keep human oblivious to the fact that they are heading towards extinction. In a flashback moment, it is shown that 5 of the group members, Mallory, Tom, Charlie, Douglas, and Lucy, attempt to make a food run to a nearby store called the Phil's Market, where Charlie used to work. So they black out the windows and the glass surface of the car and decided that they will rely on the GPS to get to the supermarket. While at the store, Mallory picks up a cage with 3 birds and decides to bring it with her into the house, fearing that they will otherwise die in the store. While they were collecting things, an intruder tried to get into the supermarket, and the birds started chirping loudly in order to warn Mallory and others about the impending danger. This person was indeed affected by the creatures, and he was trying to get others to look at the creatures by stating, look at it. If you want to see it, let me in. That's when Mallory learns how the birds can save the lives of people, as they seem to sense when the creatures are around. These birds stay with Mallory till the very end, as the birds somewhat have a sense of impending danger, and their chirping alerts people about the arrival of the creatures. In the blind school where Mallory and her children reaches at the end of the film, there is a whole flock of birds that coexist with the humans and help them by signaling the arrival of any kind of danger. The birds in the film provide protection and hope for Mallory and her family and also help them imagine a hopeful future. During their stay at Greg's house, Mallory and Olympia they go to labor at the same time, and Mallory gives birth to a boy, and Olympia gives birth to a girl. Olympia looks out after the delivery, sees the creatures, and jumps out of the window. Tom and Mallory go into hiding with the children. The kids grow up, and Mallory trains them routinely on how to walk while blindfolded, how to identify danger by hearing different sounds. During the next 5 years, Tom and Mallory kept trying to contact other survivors through radio signals in search of a safe place. During one of their food runs, the four of them, Mallory, Tom, and the two children, they share a quiet, peaceful moment where Mallory discovers some strawberry wafers and they all eat the wafers together. While she tells the kids that's what strawberry tastes like. At that moment, a group of 5 people barges in and they try to make Tom open his blindfold and look at the creatures. Tom gives up his life and kills them while ensuring Mallory succeeds in running away with the children. When Tom dies, Mallory continues her journey with the children. After rowing her boat for 38 hours, Mallory and the children came to the point where the river started speeding. And that's where the rapids were. While crossing the rapids, because of the current of the river, the boat turns again and all of them fall out of the boat. But Mallory manages to reach her children because of the bell that she had earlier given them to ring in case they are in some danger. Once she reaches the bank and starts walking towards the compound uh, with the blindfolds, she starts hearing voices from her past, of her sister Jessica calling her Dum Dum and asking her to open her eyes, of Douglas and of Tom asking her to open her eyes. She falls down, and the children also start hearing voices. The creatures conjure up um, Mallory's voice, which the children hear, asking them to remove their blindfolds. Mallory, with a strong willpower, keeps fighting off these hallucinations and screams to her children not to listen to any voice and not to remove their blindfolds at any cost. With the birds constantly chirping, the children knew that there was danger around them and did not open their blindfolds even when Mallory's voice tried to persuade them to look. Mallory screams at the creatures, declaring, "Do not take my children." Mallory started calling her children by stating that Tom's story was not finished, and she told them the story about different birds and hundreds of children playing together. She states, and it's just not a story. It's not, because I have so much I want to show you. Once inside the blind school, Mallory opens the bird box and lets the birds fly out and names her children. She meets Dr. Latham and states, "I am their mother." From the point where she did not want to acknowledge the fact that she was pregnant and was even considering abortion, till the end of the film, when she becomes their mother and smiles at the chirping of the birds and the people surrounding her, she has come to an acceptance of an entangled community and she opens herself for hope, love, and healing. Bird Box gives us the portrayal of a non-human environment that is present as a framing device as well as implicated in the existence and survival of the humans. Human accountability to this non-human environment becomes an integral part of the film's orientation. The context of the film, the otherworldly creatures align their psychopathic effect according to the past mistakes and the guilty consciousness of each individual. The ravaging and the fearful creatures are on a mission to obliterate all humans and turn them into zombie-like creatures who in turn are on the quest to convert the remaining humans into themselves. The fusion of the subjects and objects become part of an inevitable cataclysmic collapse where the discrete individual selves stop existing as material and metaphysical entities. There is a reunion with the very environment that Mallory was trying to escape with her children a while back. This sensation of de-individuation that occurs in Mallory resonates in the cell's physical resonance with the nature around them, and also with the ecology that supersedes both human rationality and personal psychology. When Mallory succeeds in reaching the blind school with her children, she is amazed by the intactness of nature in them, which points to the fact that nature is at its purest when it remains at a distance from human beings. The bliss that she feels by the presence of the birds in nature and the humans coexisting peacefully in the school shows the harmonious interchange that has occurred within Mallory's realization that nature is infinite and purely close to her, as well as her estranged selves, made her invert the human nature binary and instead usher in a conjunction of the two, where she is reborn as a human and as a mother. In the blind school, she for the first time names her children as Olympia and Tom and calls herself their mother. Otherwise, till this very point, throughout the film, she has been calling the children as referring to them as boy and girl, and she has not given them any names since the last 5 years. This assimilation of an individual life into the larger life field of being shows that there is a unification with the ecology and the world, which would give rise to different interrelations and non-identity. Bird Box preserves the dark, depressive quality of life in the shadow of the ecological catastrophe. The pervasive atmosphere of Mallory's undigested grief, along with others, in reaching the blind school and in the shadow of the ecological catastrophe, shows us that she has to strive to find new ways to carry on in a post-human world. Solidarity then unexpectedly becomes a compulsion rather than a choice, where the survivors need to arrive at a collective within a connected community. In order to navigate the complexities of the entanglements of post-human ecofeminism, a politics is urgently required that would embrace an intellectual radicalism, which would bring new practices, methods, sites of inquiry, and a recourse to interconnectedness. With the uniqueness, difference, and strangeness the post-humans, animals, and nature stands in for an ecologically inclusive politics. This post-human ecofeminist politics should aim at the necessity of helping human and non-human others, along with preserving the integrity, stability, and beauty of the ecology. Bird Box combines post-humanist, feminist, and ecological notions of incorporation that challenges the false integrity of the humans uh, of the human itself and the ideas that natures exist outside. Instead, it ushers in a post-human ecofeminist approach that dissipates the borders between the self and the outside world by getting rid of static, polarizing oppositions in favor of a hybrid and dynamic entity. Thank you. So I would now invite any comments, any questions that anybody might have, so that we can have more in-depth discussions about this. I did not go into the summarizing the movie much, but if it is required or if it comes up during the discussion, we can take that up.
Participants, the floor is now open for the questions. If you have any questions, please do unmute your mic.
Good evening, ma'am. Shivangi Gandhi this side. Thank you so much for this presentation, ma'am. I have a few questions. So your topic says exploring post-human eco-feminist entanglements in the movie Bird Box. So the post-human actually talks about the kind of hybridized bodies, the kind of distorted bodies, and and this is blurring of line between human bodies and the AI that we are actually AI world that we are actually living in. So I couldn't really understand that. Are you talking about how we can survive in a post-human world, and how we can? There is a need that we establish a sort of connection with the nature, but how we can actually do that, because the humans are no longer humans in the first place. They are hybridized bodies. A second question I have is, in the post-human world, there is a line in your paper wherein you talked about uh, the nature is not polluted, so to say. But in the post-human world, the nature is polluted. The nature is not clean. It is not as it is used to be in the very pristine form. So just wanted a few more comments along these lines.
Yeah. Yeah. Thank you, Shivani, for this question. For the first, like for the two questions, I'll go to them one by one. Regarding your first question, where you talk about post-humanism and AI in the same way, so see, there are different approaches to post-humanism. We have, within post-humanism, as I mentioned, we have feminist post-humanism, we have critical post-humanism, cultural post-humanism. Um, what I work on, and what this particular paper also deals with, is something which I like to term it as philosophical post-humanism, or something which on which Francesca Ferrando, she has paved this field. So mm, where the idea of a post-humanist approach is that it deconstructs any sense of centered species supremacy and dualism, while resourcing the present with a pluralistic and a collaborative perspective. So that's the main idea behind this kind of post-humanist approach, which focuses on the development of a post-human turn that embraces an ecological post-humanist sensitivity towards all humans, non-humans, more than humans. And yes, obviously there cannot be post-humanism, as in you mentioned the case of AI. It also looks at the way how there can be co-evolution of human and technology. It also looks at the re-elaboration of the non-human realm, where our future is more pluralistic and multi-layered. That means we do not consider technology as the enemy of humanism, but accepts it as a part of the future, where we can use it. We can use AI, where we can use technology in general to for the betterment of the present human, non-human, other than human condition. So in this kind of post-humanist future, there are places, there are spaces, not just for human, because that's the main idea, decentering the supremacy of the man, of the human as a species, but making space for the non-humans, for the other than humans as well in the same space with technology. So that's if we think about this from that kind of perspective. So that would help us to understand how in Bird Box also we are looking at a post-humanist environment, where there is this coexistence of of humans, of the other than humans, of animals, ecology, everything together, and everything has to be in a harmonious way, in a way which talks about hope and regeneration. So that's about the first part. Now, coming to the second part, post-humanism always talks about a polluted world. Not necessarily, because within post-humanism, we also have a kind of a thinking which is called a protopian view of post-humanism, which is not like a utopian view, which mostly is inclined towards transhumanism, which tries to, looks towards an ideal world where technology would replace humans. So that is a kind of a utopian understanding. On the other side, the dystopian understanding is that, technology would be the downfall of humanity. In between, we have a space where we argue for a protopian post-humanism, which does not look at a very idealistic world, but it just looks for a better tomorrow, something which is better than today. So that is a kind of approach where the post-humanism is located here, where we are looking at a tomorrow which would be better than today, where there would be a harmonious coexistence, where there would be same respect given to the ecology as to the human species, as well as to the non-humans, to animals, to other than humans. So yeah, that is the understanding of philosophical post-humanism or a critical post-humanistic view as well, where we are trying to develop or we are trying to be better, where we are trying to take care of this polluted world, which is not necessarily polluted in the current moment, but working towards alternatives so that we can save it from being polluted further. I hope that answers your questions.
Thank you, ma'am. Thank you so much.
Yeah.
Mom, there's a question in the chat box. May I read it for you, Mom?
I'm going to put it from Shubhangi. Shubhagini Jana, is the question written? Yeah. So I had a question, if in the apocalyptic setting, humans are the only ones getting affected and they depend on birds to warn them of danger, but if it does not address how other beings are surviving, when such a narrative focuses heavily on human survival, can we say that it is still becoming kind of anthropocentric? For the human survival is more important. Yes, definitely. The film focuses on a very, anthropocentric viewpoint where it looks everything from Mallory's point of view, played by Sandra Bullock. But you're right. These are very important questions that you have, raised. What about the other beings? What about the animals? How are the other animals and other beings are surviving? Not just the movie, which was released in 2018, come to think about the pandemic, 2 years later, there was all of this, we have seen all the migrants walking on foot. We have seen different drives, different welfare programs for people, but who are the ones who got left out? The disabled individuals, animals, they could not find food. We saw, how the other beings were constantly getting affected. So it's just not in the film. If we have to, see it in the contemporary moment. So pandemic was one such example where, the questions that you asked, we could actually see it, where we humans were so consumed about our own survival that for us, the other beings stopped existing for a moment, and nobody even, paid attention that how these who are going to, feed them, or what about their safety. So yes, this film is from that point of view, but then again, if we have to think it from a post-humanist point of view, it will not be a post-humanistic approach completely until and unless all beings are accounted for. Okay, Nivedita has a question. Can you please explain the idea of defamiliarization in the context of post-humanism? Okay, if we have to talk about this in the context of the film, more than defamiliarization, more than estrangement, we saw a refamiliarization, rather, completely opposite of it, where the character Mallory, around who this narrative is centered at the very beginning, how she was disconnected from. She just like to be in her studio painting and not. She was dissociated from everything. Even when a pandemic is happening, a disaster is happening, she shuts off the television, not being bothered by anything. To the point at the end where she willingly wants to belong to a community. And so, if we have to look at this from the broader field of post-humanist studies, defamiliarization does not really, have it is not the way to go for the kind of post-humanist attitudes and approaches that we are constantly talking about, or that is constantly is in discourse with. Rather, having an understanding, having connectedness, having familiarization, not with only our own species, but familiarizing ourselves with other species, with things that exist around us. Starting, it could be something as small as a mushroom, to artificial intelligence that could be integrated with our life, with our surroundings, in order to have an interconnected way of living where we are familiarized with all the aspects of the universe around us. So I think that is something which the posthumanism that I'm talking about is more focused on. So the idea would be shifting from a defamiliarizing perspective to familiarizing ourselves with everything that is happening around us. Abhijit has a question. Discuss about care narrative in ecofeminist readings. So my question is, how can we then differ in researching the same from medical humanities perspectives, okay? Because that too, in one way, focuses on studying the care dynamics in a particular context. That shares some insights. Yes. Differing again, I really don't like, differing that kind of approach, but I myself have worked a bit, and I'm still working the intersection of posthumanism and disability studies. So one thread that would help you to connect this would be the feminist disability studies framework, where the same interpretation that women have been historically, involved in caregiving, in protecting the vulnerability, is something that you can also draw in parallel with caregiving. Caregiving itself is a very broad and a very complex field within disability studies, where the caregivers, they are entrusted with lots of responsibilities, and there is this societal expectation that if there is a child with certain disabilities, it's the mother who would have to take care of the child, and the society expects the mother to be constantly looking after the child. So that's kind of approach we have for within the medical humanities field also, even to the extent that the caregivers, the woman caregiver, is also sometimes not even they are not pitied, and there is no sympathy as much, but they would have to be at the receiving end of certain cruel and brutal remarks if they're not doing their job well. But in India, in the global south, it's not possible to have a full-time caregiver for all disabled individuals. So it's automatically the burden are imposed with this kind of responsibility. So there is a proper training. Proper training would be required, for in order to be a caregiver, because it's not a one size fits all thing. Each disability requires each individualistic, treatment, individualistic way of dealing with it, way of having that person, see or navigating their life. So caregivers, it's generally assumed that they know all of that, but from the medical point of view, there has to be significant training. The caregivers themselves have to understand that the kind of responsibility that they're entrusted with, but they generally don't. So it's a very complex field that we have, caregiving within disability studies, and you can extend it as a common thread with post-human or even ecofeminism as well, where the care dynamics kind of works in the same way that for all the starting from the Chipko movement till Bird Box, we see how the women, the female, are thought about or are generally considered to be the one who would be protecting the vulnerable, whether it's ecology or whether it's disabled individuals.
Ma'am, I have a question, ma'am.
Yes.
So I want your take on how does post-human feminism intersects with the Gaia hypothesis to reconfigure an understanding of human agency and planetary responsibility. So I really wanted to know your perspective on this, ma'am.
Okay. So the Gaia hypothesis, where it is, it derives from it. It originates from that, where we are now looking at kind of a framework where we are putting eco-criticism, feminism, all of these aspects. But the crux that lies behind it is protecting, Timothy Morton in his work, he says that he hates the term protecting, because then that again makes us feel that we are a superior species who should be protecting the nature. But instead, finding a way in which we can coexist without destructing it further, without destroying its essence, and finding also ways in which we are not harming the ecology and taking it away from other beings who would have, rather utilized it or, find food, shelter from it in the same way that we have done. So a sustainable approach is something I think that post-humanism brings to the ongoing discourse, where not only just thinking about our species, but thinking about the other species as well, and a sense of collective belonging, a sense of community, just not for the human species, but for animals, but for every other components of the nature, and kind of a hope and having a sense of harmony, having a sense of regeneration. Thinking that, as the participants posed the questions earlier, not thinking that it is going to be a polluted world, polluted nature, but rather deriving, rather building on the Gaia hypothesis and the eco-critical approaches, and thinking about a better tomorrow where we can use those knowledge and use it maybe with technology. We can integrate that with technology to have a better tomorrow where we can have a more healthier ecology, which would be a better fit not just for us but for also the other beings.
Thank you so much, ma'am.
Yeah, sure. I don't think I can type it here.
Yeah. We have shared it.
Yeah. Oh, thank you.
Thank you so much, ma'am, for your thought-provoking analysis of Bird Box, which offers a fascinating exploration of post-human ecofeminist theme. And also, your insights effectively highlighted the film's nuanced portrayal of human and non-human entanglements, revealing the intricate relationship between individuals, community, and the environment. And also, the post-apocalyptic narrative framework provides a unique lens through which to examine resilience, survival, and the reconfiguration of social bonds, like sparking important discussions about the interconnectedness of human and ecological well-being. Thank you so much, ma'am, for your time. It's just an honor for us to have you, ma'am. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you to all the wonderful participants for asking such important and thought-provoking questions. So glad to be a part of this. Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am. Good day, ma'am.
Yeah, good day. Thank you.